This is just a very quick piece reflecting on the nature and function of conscience. Um, Conscience is an area of kind of endless curiosity or wonder or inquiry in human affairs. One of the constant fascination of people that take in current events and the like, or when there are famous court cases, and people are always very interested to see how the defendant reacts, especially for egregious crimes, for kind of unconscionable crimes. When they receive their sentence, there's always an element that looks to see if the perpetrator is quote unquote contrite. There's a very big fascination with news if a perpetrator of horrible crimes laughs at the time of sentencing or smiles or shows no relationship with the seriousness of or the perversity of what they've committed and fallen into. And so it's my view that that this particular fascination, or always very powerful force in news, is to see how the accused behave when sentenced. I believe this has to do with a ubiquitous or widespread fascination or curiosity or impact of reflection on the function of conscience in our lives. Because the reason for that is because we are never without the constant voice of conscience acting in our lives. It happens all day and every day. It happens when you grab a cookie instead of an apple. It happens if you pick up change lying around that you know could be found by its original owner. It's just a constant force in our lives. And I believe it's natural for the human being to wonder if there's ever a way to be independent of that or free of that, or not have the constant and incessant function of conscience operating in our lives. And I believe this is what makes the typical consumer of contemporary affairs especially fascinated to see, for those who've done great wrong, do they show contrition? And so related to that then is the fact that sooner or later, or inevitably in our lives, we're going to see that there are people who seem to have a capacity for committing harm or evil to a much higher degree than ourselves. And because we experience the immediate impact of conscience in our lives, we wonder, how is it possible for us to be so plagued by a voice of correction from within, just for tiny wrongs, if they're even wrongs at all? Whereas it seems like the person in the next cubicle, or a person on Wall Street, or a person who's running Big Pharma, or a person running Nestle's, what happens to them, or how is it possible for them to do great harm, massive harm, and not seem to be troubled by it, or seem to be able to persist in it? And so this range of curiosity about the capacity to do wrong arises out of the immediate and constant experience of conscience in our lives. So in this couple of minutes, I just want to take a very quick look at this element of conscience, of kind of curiosity about the range of possibility to do evil or to do harm that is always with us, particularly tied to the incessant human experience, that all wrong that is contemplated is immediately met by the voice of conscience. So if it is naturally, if it's human, to have this inner voice of correction, or some people call it judgment or guilt or whatever. There's a lot of negative reactions to the constancy of the voice of conscience, but I don't think it should be regarded that way at all. Personally, I think it's our kindest lover that seeks our good. That's so. I think it's already a bad orientation to be hostile to that aspect of our character that, quote unquote, makes us feel bad. And there's all kind of psychologistic or kind of anarchist, like subjectively anarchistic efforts to regard that as what's it called, superego or guilt. Or there's hostility to religion because of that. But actually, to be so constructed as to have a never-ending partner that's making an effort to help us be better than we otherwise would be is an enormous gift. It might be the finest part of being human. So then it's part of the definition. Being human means having a conscience. Being human means never being without, even for a split second, a voice that's ready to jump all over me every time I contemplate something that isn't as fine as can be. And if that's being human, how is it possible for such a massive amount of genuinely bad behavior, genuine evil, genuine exploitation and oppression and harm to others? If that voice is there, why is it so feeble, seemingly, in the lives of some? And so what I'd like to posit, and I'm trying to keep this short, is that conscience alone is not sufficient to keep individuals on the right track because of the following, or at least in part because of the following. Conscience is nothing other than that function which seeks to protect the good that, even non-defined, that obtains or that is held within us as a natural, innate form of knowledge. Conscience seeks to lift higher my contemplations and my actions toward an ideal self that enjoys freedom. In fact, that's really what it's trying to provide, making us free from the burdens of acting contrary to our higher selves, or the good we could do and the good we could be. But it as a freestanding entity, and as something which seeks to uplift and protect, the issue or problem or the question is that it's attached to access to a concept of good, and that's where its limitation lies. So that we have our own private or personal responsibility on our side to forge an ever more sophisticated, ever more accurate, ever more refined, ever more true grasp of what good truly is. That the ideal to which conscience can attach itself and be the protector of is the question. So that if my inner knowledge of what quote unquote is good, it has a very low bar. Like it's all right to just exploit another person for my own sexual satisfaction. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody does it. It's the nature of society. And so I'm passing through life kind of crushing hearts, hurting people, wrecking emotions, wrecking families. But somehow I've come to be socialized in such a way that this behavior is just fine, that the conscience is not trying to bring us outside of this form of very destructive and very selfish behavior. The conscience attaches itself to the highest grasp of what's true and constantly acts in our lives to protect it. That's why it can be a force functioning in the life of a seemingly evil or bad person with the same overwhelming constancy and power that functions in the life of me or a seemingly good person. It's just that its function in life to lift us up toward the ideal is limited by the extent to which we ourselves are capable of recognizing ever higher and higher and higher ideals. So that if we thought it were natural that all human beings should have the same level of sacrifice as saints, as heroes, as nurses who've died in African jungles trying to heal little children, if this was the level or normal, the thought of what's normal to be as human, then our conscience would be constantly calling us or chastising us or urging us to be nothing less than that. So conscience alone is not a sufficient force to elevate us to extremely high standards of goodness and saintliness, because it's our own responsibility, or perhaps by the grace of God, to be tied to ever higher, more exquisite, more complete, and more far-ranging heights of concept of goodness. Then our conscience attaches to that and functions as guardrails and guidelines and encouragement and voices and please do that and don't do that. But it has to be attached to a clear and firm and high grasp of a vision of goodness and a vision of the ideal me, or the ideal way of being genuinely good as a person, as a human being. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back soon.